Welcome to XRP On Moon, the channel where we break down real data, real developments, and real signals behind XRP. Today's topic is critical, and it's something most people are not fully prepared for. XRP, it'll be shocking, reprice. This is not hype, this is not speculation without basis. This is a structured, analytical breakdown of what a reprice actually means, and why this discussion is gaining serious traction. Let's get straight to the point. A reprice is not the same as a normal price increase. This is where most people get it wrong. In traditional market terms, assets move based on supply and demand, slow accumulation, gradual trends, corrections, and cycles. But a reprice refers to a sudden shift in valuation, a moment where the market reassesses the asset entirely based on new information or a major structural change. This kind of move is rare, but when it happens, it is aggressive and often unexpected. Now the question is, why is XRP even being discussed in this context? The answer lies in its positioning. Unlike most digital assets, XRP is not trying to be a store of value or a speculative token. Its core function is tied to liquidity and cross-border value transfer, particularly through the infrastructure developed by Ripple. This puts XRP in a completely different category compared to assets like Bitcoin or Ethereum. The global financial system currently relies on outdated settlement mechanisms. Cross-border payments can take days, involve multiple intermediaries, and incur significant costs. This inefficiency is not a small problem. It is a multi-trillion-dollar friction point. Ripple's solution aims to remove that friction, and XRP sits at the center of that system as a bridge asset. Here is where things start to become interesting. If XRP is used at scale, not in theory, but in real-world financial flows, then its valuation model begins to change. It is no longer just a traded asset, it becomes a utility layer for liquidity. And when an asset transitions from speculative trading to functional infrastructure, the market often reevaluates its price very quickly. Another key factor is regulatory clarity. For years, uncertainty surrounding XRP, especially due to the involvement of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, has limited institutional participation. Large financial players do not operate in uncertain legal environments, but as clarity improves, the barrier to entry begins to drop, and when institutions enter, they do not move in small volumes. This is not about retail hype, this is about capital flow. Institutions require deep liquidity, fast settlement, and regulatory compliance. XRP is one of the few digital assets that has been designed with these requirements in mind. If these institutions begin to utilize XRP at scale, demand dynamics could shift rapidly. And that's where the idea of a reprice starts to move from theory to possibility. However, it's important to stay grounded. A reprice is not guaranteed. Markets are complex systems influenced by macro conditions, liquidity cycles, and investor sentiment. Even with strong fundamentals, price movements can take time. But what matters here is not prediction. It's preparation and awareness. Because when structural shifts happen, they don't send invitations. To understand how a potential XRP reprice could unfold, the focus needs to shift toward institutional mechanics. Specifically, how financial institutions interact with liquidity at scale. This is where most retail investors lose clarity, because the conversation moves away from charts and into infrastructure. At the center of this discussion is the system developed by Ripple known as On-Demand Liquidity, ODL. This system is designed to eliminate the need for pre-funded accounts in cross-border transactions. Traditionally, banks and payment providers must hold large amounts of capital in foreign accounts, capital that remains idle just to facilitate transfers. This is inefficient and costly. ODL changes that model completely. Instead of locking capital across multiple jurisdictions, an institution can convert its local currency into XRP, transfer it across borders within seconds, and convert it into the destination currency almost instantly. The entire process removes intermediaries, reduces settlement time, and frees up capital. From an efficiency standpoint, this is a major upgrade to the current financial system. Now consider what happens if this system scales. We are not talking about small transactions. Cross-border payment flows reach into the trillions annually. Even a small percentage of that volume moving through XRP-based liquidity channels would represent a significant increase in demand. But more importantly, this demand is not speculative, it is functional. It exists because the system requires it to operate. This is where the concept of a reprice starts to gain more structure. If XRP becomes a bridge asset for high-volume transactions, its price may need to adjust to support that level of activity efficiently. A higher price can allow large transactions to be processed with fewer tokens, reducing friction in the system. While this idea is debated, it remains a key argument among analysts who support the reprice thesis. Another critical layer is institutional trust. Financial entities do not adopt new technology based solely on efficiency. They require regulatory clarity, risk management frameworks, and compliance assurance. This is why developments involving the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission have had such a strong influence on XRP's trajectory. Legal uncertainty delays adoption, clarity accelerates it. In parallel, there is growing interest in central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Multiple countries are actively researching or piloting digital versions of their national currencies. Ripple has positioned itself as a technology provider in this space, offering infrastructure that can support issuance and interoperability. If XRP or related systems become part of this ecosystem, the scale of usage could expand significantly. However, it is important to separate potential from certainty. Adoption does not happen overnight. Financial systems move slowly, and integration requires testing, compliance checks, and coordination across multiple jihad. Even if the technology is ready, the rollout can take years. This means that any reprice event tied to adoption would likely be preceded by measurable indicators, increasing transaction volume, new institutional partnerships, and broader network usage. There is also the factor of liquidity distribution. For XRP to function effectively at scale, liquidity must be available across multiple markets and exchanges. This requires a mature market structure with deep order books and minimal slippage. Institutional participation can help build this structure, but it takes time to develop. Another point often overlooked is competition. While XRP offers a strong use case, it is not operating in a vacuum. Traditional financial systems are evolving, and other blockchain solutions are targeting the same problem. The outcome will depend on which system can deliver the best combination of speed, cost efficiency, and regulatory compliance. What matters most here is understanding that a reprice, if it occurs, would not be random. It would be the result of increasing utility, growing demand from institutions, and a shift in how the market values XRP's role in global finance. To fully evaluate the possibility of an XRP reprice, it is necessary to step back and analyze the macroeconomic environment. No asset, including XRP, moves in isolation. Global liquidity, central bank policy, and overall risk sentiment play a decisive role in determining how capital flows across markets. Start with liquidity. When central banks inject liquidity into the financial system through lower interest rates or monetary easing, risk assets tend to benefit. This includes equities, commodities, and digital assets. In contrast, when liquidity tightens through rate hikes or reduced money supply, capital becomes more conservative. This directly impacts how much investment flows into cryptocurrencies. This matters because even if XRP has strong utility, large-scale price movements require capital. Institutional adoption alone is not enough. It must be supported by a macro environment that allows risk exposure. If liquidity conditions are restrictive, even fundamentally strong assets can remain suppressed for extended periods. Another critical factor is the shifting perception of blockchain technology within traditional finance. Over the past decade, the narrative has evolved from skepticism to cautious exploration. Financial institutions are no longer asking if blockchain has value, they are asking how it can be integrated efficiently. This shift is gradual, but it is important. Within this context, Ripple is positioning its infrastructure as a solution to a very specific problem: cross-border inefficiency. This is not a theoretical use case. It is a real, measurable issue in the global financial system. If institutions begin to adopt these solutions at scale, XRP's role becomes more relevant. However, relevance alone does not guarantee a reprice. Market behavior is influenced by expectations as much as by reality. If investors anticipate future adoption, price movements can occur before the actual utility is fully realized. This creates a feedback loop where speculation and fundamentals interact. In some cases, this leads to overvaluation. In others, it leads to delayed recognition of value. Volatility is also a defining characteristic of crypto markets. XRP has historically experienced sharp price movements, followed by periods of consolidation. A reprice event, if it occurs, is unlikely to be smooth or predictable. Rapid upward movements can be followed by corrections as the market searches for equilibrium. Another dimension to consider is global financial stress. During periods of instability, such as banking crises or currency devaluation, alternative financial systems gain attention. Blockchain-based solutions, including those involving XRP, may be viewed as more efficient or resilient under certain conditions. This does not guarantee adoption, but it increases the likelihood of exploration and testing by institutions. At the same time, competition remains a constant factor. Traditional payment networks are improving, and other blockchain projects are targeting similar use cases. The long-term outcome will depend on execution, which system can deliver consistent performance, regulatory compliance, and cost efficiency at scale. It is also important to monitor measurable indicators rather than relying on narrative alone. These include transaction volumes on XRP-based systems, the number of active institutional partnerships, and expansion into new financial corridors. These data points provide insight into whether adoption is actually increasing or simply being discussed. Ultimately, a reprice scenario would likely require alignment between multiple forces: strong utility, institutional participation, favorable macro conditions, and clear regulatory frameworks. If one of these elements is missing, the process can slow down or stall. As the discussion around an XRP reprice continues to grow, it becomes increasingly important to separate facts from misconceptions. A large portion of the confusion in the market comes from misinterpreting how price movements actually occur, especially when terms like reprice are used without proper context. One of the most common misunderstandings is the belief that XRP will suddenly jump to extremely high valuations without any underlying change in fundamentals. This assumption ignores how markets function. A structural reprice, if it happens, would be driven by measurable developments, such as increased utility, higher transaction volume, and stronger institutional participation, not just speculation or social media sentiment. Another major misconception revolves around liquidity requirements. Some argue that XRP must reach very high price levels to handle global transaction flows. While there is a technical argument that higher prices can improve efficiency by reducing the number of tokens needed per transaction, this is not the only way liquidity can scale. Increased market depth, tighter spreads, and improved infrastructure can also support large transaction volumes without requiring extreme price levels. Supply is another area where confusion is widespread. XRP has a large total supply compared to many other digital assets. This does not eliminate its potential, but it does influence how price reacts to demand. Assets with larger supply typically require significantly more capital inflow to achieve the same percentage gains as lower supply assets. Ignoring this factor leads to unrealistic expectations. There is also a persistent misunderstanding about the relationship between XRP and Ripple. While Ripple develops and promotes technologies that utilize XRP, the asset itself operates independently on its own ledger. This distinction is critical, especially when analyzing regulatory developments or partnerships. Not every announcement related to Ripple directly translates into immediate price impact for XRP. Regulatory clarity remains one of the most important variables. The involvement of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has created prolonged uncertainty in the market. Many participants assume that once clarity is achieved, price will instantly surge. In reality, regulatory resolution is more likely to act as an enabler, allowing institutions to participate rather than being a direct trigger for immediate price expansion. Another issue is the influence of hype cycles. Social media platforms often amplify extreme predictions, creating a distorted perception of reality. Claims of guaranteed price targets or inevitable outcomes are rarely supported by data. These narratives can attract attention, but they also increase the risk of emotional decision-making. A more disciplined approach involves focusing on verifiable indicators. These include growth in on-demand liquidity usage, expansion of financial corridors, institutional partnerships, and transaction metrics on the network. These data points provide a clearer picture of whether XRP is moving toward increased utility or simply benefiting from short-term speculation. Timing is another critical factor that is often overlooked. Even if all the necessary conditions for a reprice begin to align, markets do not move on a fixed schedule. There can be delays, periods of consolidation, and unexpected external influences that impact momentum. Expecting immediate results can lead to frustration and poor strategic decisions. Risk management must also be part of the conversation. No scenario, including a reprice, is guaranteed. Markets can move in unexpected directions, and overexposure to a single asset increases vulnerability. A structured approach that includes diversification and clear risk parameters is essential for long-term sustainability. Ultimately, the difference between informed positioning and speculation comes down to understanding. A reprice is not about hope, it is about conditions, and those conditions must be supported by real-world adoption, regulatory clarity, and a market environment that allows capital to flow efficiently. Bringing everything together, the concept of an XRP reprice is not based on a single event or a single trigger. It is the result of multiple layers aligning at the same time. Throughout this breakdown, the focus has remained on structure, not speculation. Because when markets make significant moves, they are usually driven by underlying shifts, not surface-level narratives. At the center of this discussion is utility. If XRP continues to expand its role as a bridge asset in cross-border payments, its demand profile changes. This is not about retail trading volume. It is about transactional demand driven by real financial flows. The more XRP is used to move value efficiently, the stronger its foundation becomes. Closely tied to this is institutional participation. Financial entities require clarity, compliance, and reliability before integrating any new system. The progress of Ripple in building partnerships and expanding its payment infrastructure is a key variable. However, adoption must be measured, not assumed. Watching actual usage metrics will always provide more value than relying on announcements alone. Regulation remains one of the most critical components. The involvement of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has created a prolonged period of uncertainty. As this uncertainty reduces, barriers to institutional entry begin to lower. But it is important to understand that regulatory clarity acts as a gateway, not a guarantee of immediate price expansion. Another important factor is timing. Markets often move ahead of confirmed developments, pricing and expectations before they fully materialize. This creates volatility and can lead to sharp movements in both directions. A potential reprice, if it occurs, may not follow a clean or predictable pattern. It could involve rapid upward movements followed by corrections as the market stabilizes. Macro conditions must also be considered. Global liquidity, interest rates, and overall risk sentiment influence how much capital is available to flow into assets like XRP. Even with strong fundamentals, restrictive financial conditions can delay momentum. On the other hand, favorable liquidity environments can accelerate price discovery. It is also necessary to maintain realistic expectations. A reprice does not mean infinite or guaranteed upside. It means the market reassesses value based on new conditions. The scale of that reassessment depends on how significant those conditions are. Overestimating outcomes without supporting data can lead to poor decisions. For those analyzing XRP, the most effective approach is to stay focused on signals that matter. Growth in on-demand liquidity usage, expansion into new payment corridors, institutional engagement, and regulatory developments. These indicators provide a grounded view of progress. At the same time, risk management should never be ignored. Concentration in a single asset increases exposure to volatility. A structured strategy, clear entry and exit planning, and disciplined decision-making are essential in navigating any market, especially one as dynamic as crypto. The key takeaway is simple. A reprice is possible, but it is conditional. It depends on execution, adoption, and the broader financial environment. Understanding these factors is what separates informed positioning from speculation. Financial disclaimer: this content is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. Cryptocurrency investments, including XRP, are highly volatile and involve significant risk. Always do your own research and consult with a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decisions.